If you go back 2,000 years ago, the only people who had legal rights within the system were rich, white, free, citizen, adult men. And over time, we then extended those rights bit by bit. And then we extended them through to include people who were enslaved, and we freed those people. We extended it to women and to children. And we're now at the stage where basically all humans have ostensibly legal rights and legal standing. But then the question is, do we extend that even further to include nature?
But what does social justice mean to you as a barrister, as well as someone who cares so much about nature?
For me, it means very different things for humans versus nature. So for humans, it's about equality, justice, freedom, living a happy and fulfilled life, and all the different elements of that. For nature, social justice means the right to play the role in our ecosystems and Earth that they were put here to do, I guess, without unnecessary interference in that.
Paul Powlesland is a barrister at Garden Court Chambers and co-founder of Lawyers for Nature. He specialises in upholding the rights of environmental activists to protest and protect the natural world. He lives in East London on his boat, the Thieving Magpie, and started a community of boaters to protect and restore the river. In 2022, he faced arrest if he wrote "Not My King" on a blank piece of paper. He has shown the limits of free speech in Great Britain, the power of the monarchy, and the need for citizens to act to protect our human rights. Let's learn. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining us on the second series of the School of Social Justice video podcast. I'm really happy to have you here. I've been really looking forward to this, given all of the activities and actions you've done recently, which have caused a stir, but also really raised awareness of some of the most important social justice issues of our time. And I once recently compared you to Gandhi, and I think for legitimate reasons. I mean, you are a lawyer, but also someone who, you might not call yourself this, but I see as a fellow troublemaker, particularly for people who cause trouble for other people, other people's lives. But also you care about the earth that we inhabit and want to protect it for future generations and current generations. So with that big comparison...
Yeah, I say in general, that's definitely no way a valid comparison. But interestingly, Winston Churchill disparagingly described Gandhi as a seditious Middle Temple lawyer in the 1930s. Okay. And I'm actually a barrister at Middle Temple. So it's one of my ambitions in life to be described as a seditious Middle Temple lawyer. Which is the same thing that Churchill said about Gandhi, but otherwise I don't reach anywhere near that, I'm afraid.
I feel like that will soon happen though. That description. So much to talk about, and as you know, with the School of Social Justice, our mission is to train the next generation of Martin Luther Kings, and not only that specific person, Martin Luther King, but people like him. Your Greta Thunbergs, your Gandhis, but also modern day people like you who are making a difference at the forefront of society. So thank you for joining us. I'm really excited, as I say. First off, it would be great to know a bit about yourself, your work, and what you do.
Where do I start?
Yeah. I mean, tell us a bit about maybe your work in protecting nature.
Yes, so...
And where does that come from?
Yeah, I'm a barrister in my day job, and for the first sort of 5 years of being a barrister, I was just doing kind of normal civil commercial practice, and then very much fell in love with nature and wanted to bring that love of nature into my work, I guess.
How do you fall in love with nature?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Probably the most important question you're going to ask this today, actually, for me, for nature activism. I believe that people will love that which they know and will protect that which they love.
And say it again.
Love that which they know and protect that which they love. So it's like knowledge, then love, then protection naturally flows. And so really just spending time in nature and getting to know nature and specific parts of nature were key for me. And that started really, I moved onto a boat shortly after I became a barrister, mainly because I didn't want to pay rent.
Okay.
But didn't realise that actually by doing that I was giving myself a kind of deep immersion into nature. In a literal sense, right? A boat sits in the water, so and you're at a very different level, and nature even perceives you differently. It's like living in a bird hide. There's things you look at birds through and they can't really see you, so they don't get frightened. It's kind of like that on a boat. Because of the way the boat is designed, nature doesn't run away or fly away from you as much. So I spent years just being that close to nature without intending to. It wasn't like a thing I did deliberately. But then very much fell in love with it. And then I wanted to have a project to get even closer to nature, I guess, and to help actively restore it. So I moved my boat to the River Roding in East London, which we're going to probably talk about in a bit more depth. And that has really turbocharged that love, because it's spending lots of time in one place in nature and seeing it change throughout the seasons and seeing that over and over again and seeing how what I and others do on the river impacts it.
That description of how proximity to something helps one care for it more, I think is a really important lesson, particularly for folk who, they might be in proximity to in an urban centre where they see knife crime right in front of the doors, or poverty all around them, or kind of just derelict areas where they've not seen any regeneration for years. And in a way, sometimes loving your community so much that you don't want to see it like that. I mean, your proximity to nature brought you to, in your words, fall in love with it, but also care for it. And I think for folk who might not necessarily be connected to nature, they might have something else in proximity to them that they want to make a difference to. And I think looking directly at what's in front of you, for you, seemed like such an important thing.
I'd say on the nature access point that connection to nature and access to nature is a class issue.
Go on, what do you mean by that?
Because in this country particularly, we seem to have this attitude that like rich people deserve nature.
Okay, interesting.
And poor people don't. Like if you go, I live in Barking, so the river I live on is Barking. It's one of the poorest boroughs in London, quite far in East London. And just go to Barking, the town centre, and there's like hardly any trees. It's just like this intense concrete. Go to Kensington, their streets are lined with trees.
Lush trees.
Primrose Hill and the only place you can go wild swimming in London. Actually, there's a couple of others now, but like the main place is Hampstead, right? Highgate Ponds. Right, that is not a coincidence that Highgate is one of the richest areas in London, because they campaigned and have the rich people who live there campaigned and fought to keep that access and that place to access nature. There's a reason why there's no wild swimming ponds in East London, right?
So why does that matter? I mean, why should nature matter to folk who are working class and might be so far removed from any of those ponds and nice places that folk in your Kensingtons and so forth? I
fundamentally believe that access to nature and time spent in nature is crucial for our mental health and for our well-being. And people feel that, everyone wants to try and get out into nature. Like on the road, and we built a bench just like off the footpath, like just under a tree, and it's the most used thing that we've done, because people just want somewhere they can just spend time out in nature. I've seen relationships end there, I've seen relationships start there, I've seen it's a place where kids go to just like get away from their parents, where people go to like hang out. It's just a tiny little bit in nature. People really love it and need it, and I think the research is there that we need access to nature, but it's it's not really seen as something that poor areas deserve, I think. And there's a phrase that I really loved, not directly related to nature, but where I live in Barking, the Sikh community built this incredible new temple, like built of marble, all this decoration on, right next to a dual carriageway in Barking. It's really incongruous. And I spoke to the person who was in charge of building it and just said, thank you for building something so beautiful in Barking. And he paused and he was like, well, Barking deserves beauty. And that really stuck with me. Like, Barking deserves beauty, it deserves natural beauty, and everyone, no matter how rich or poor they are, deserve access to nature and easy access to nature. Because again, a lot of middle class people are willing and able to travel to a nature reserve to go and look at birds, but other people are less able to travel, and so they need to have that access close to them. And in many parts of London, there's no wildness. There's parks maybe, but it's all very manicured. So we need places that people can go that are wild and where they can actually be amongst nature to form that connection.
I mean, I mentioned to you that I'm going to be moving to the Philippines in a couple of weeks, and part of that reason was when I was there last October, November 2022, I'd spent some time in a place called La Union where, I mean, it's a surf town, and partly inspired me to grow my hair, and I wanted to be like a surfer dude when I go there. But also just walking down the beach, feet caressing the sand, the breeze of the fresh air, seeing the waves, sun setting. It's not necessarily the most untouched place in the world, but just being connected to nature in that very physical sense really felt healing. And it's a world which I don't know enough about, but from what I've seen, the research does show how nature can help folk kind of heal, and it being crucial to mental health. And I'd love to know a bit more about that when we talk about kind of the need to do this more widely. Before we do that, what does social justice mean to you? Given that some would say, I mean, what does nature have to do with society and people? You've kind of alluded to it, but what does social justice mean to you as a barrister, as well as someone who cares so much about nature?
Social justice, to me, it means different things.
Okay.
Different different for different, I say people, but different elements of society and the earth. So for me, it means very different things for humans versus nature. So for humans, it's about equality, justice, freedom, living a happy and fulfilled life, and all the different elements of that. And I do work that goes towards that. So in my day job, I'm a housing barrister. So I stop people getting evicted from their homes. Key part of social justice, having somewhere to live, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's core.
And acting for tenants who acting for employees who've been sacked and that kind of thing. But I think we really need to extend social justice to the natural world. And obviously that's going to mean different things, because a tree doesn't have the same needs or desires as a human wants, so we can't necessarily look at exactly the same terms. But I think for nature, social justice means the right to play the role in our ecosystems and earth that they were put here to do, I guess, without unnecessary interference in that. And that sounds quite abstract, so let me explain, I guess. What I see the extension of like rights to nature and protections to nature as not this kind of sudden departure from where we are now, but the next stage in a long process that we've been walking for the last couple of thousand years of extensions of rights.
Interesting.
If you go back 2,000 years ago, the only people who had legal rights within the system were rich, white, free, citizen, adult men. And over time, we then extended those rights bit by bit. So we extended them from citizens to non-citizens, like the Roman era or whatever. And then we extended them through to include people who were enslaved, and we freed those people. We extended it to women and to children. And we're now at the stage where basically all humans have ostensibly legal rights and legal standing. But then the question is, do we extend that even further to include nature? And I believe that we should, because the human system really impacts upon nature, and so we should hear its voice in the decisions that we make.
I mean, in ways, not even in a way, advocacy is about speaking on behalf and representing people and things that can't represent themselves. And it's a very interesting kind of provocation to many listeners, but also push for what is, necessary, which is the protection of our earth in order to save it from the damage that has and is being done to it. Why should people care, though? So why should people care, particularly at a time when there's economic downturn, People are struggling, they need to focus on themselves. People say it's all about taking care of oneself. Why should people care about social justice, but also the social justice which you describe, which is about nature?
I always see this as like two things. There's like loving altruism and deep self-interest. And you can go on a principled thing, just that but I believe, for instance, that nature is sacred and should just be protected, which is kind of like almost a philosophical, spiritual belief, I guess.
Yes, yeah.
In the same way as many extensions of rights throughout history. For instance, a lot of the people who, the abolitionists in the UK who campaigned successfully to end slavery were motivated by a religious belief that all peoples were children of God, they were born free and they should be free. So it wasn't necessarily a logical thing, potentially. And actually at the time, of course, it was seen as illogical in economic terms because the entire economy was based around exploiting slaves and on the practical benefits that brought. So again, that was a similar debate then. It was like, it's a philosophical belief, and that's kind of what I believe. But actually with nature, I think you can also go another stage and say that we actually, humans need that restriction on our own behaviour in relation to nature. I think, like if you think about the way an adult relates to a child, you can't give the child what it wants all the time because it's actually ultimately bad for it. And I feel like that's kind of where humanity's reached. We have the power now to destroy nature to the extent that we will also destroy ourselves. And it is, I think, evidentially scientifically true that if we carry on the current path of extractive capitalism, we will end up in the next century actually destroying our own civilization because of the impacts that we will have on nature, because of course we're intrinsically connected to nature. We rely on nature for our own existence. When we breathe out, the trees breathe in, and when the trees breathe out, we breathe in. That's where the air comes from, and like the river that I work on, hundreds of thousands of people rely on that river for water, and without water, what are we going to do? So I believe that in recognising nature's rights, we are in our own way protecting ourselves. But it's difficult because people only see it in the kind of, I'm being stopped from doing this thing that I want to do, but sometimes we need to be stopped for our own long-term benefit, if that makes sense.
I'm really impressed by the argument because I've not heard it articulated in such a way where it becomes very clear that actually, we talk about social justice, of course, in the Social Justice Video podcast a lot. And oftentimes when asked this question about why should we care, it's about ensuring that we live in a world where, you almost reduce the threats of other people damaging yourself, is what lots of guests have said so far. But actually, what you've articulated is a sense of self-harm by harming the earth. Clearly, your ability to think and articulate an argument in response to many arguments which go against what you believe is a skill which you developed, and as a barrister and as a campaigner. What are the methods through which we can achieve this stuff? So clearly making advocating on those who cannot advocate for themselves, as well as making arguments within the courts and also publicly through the media is important. I mean, what methods have you utilised to push forward the kind of change you want to see?
Lots of different ones, I guess. Speaking to people, advocating for it, actually expressing my love for nature, which is probably something we don't do enough in activism. Actually, I think a lot of social justice, if you boil it down, is actually about love. Like equality is about saying that all humans are, in your eyes, equal, and the ending of slavery was about love. I believe the civil rights movement was, in a sense. And I believe the same is true of nature, and advocating in relation to that. I'm also a real fan of just doing things.
Okay, go on.
Planting trees and daring people to stop you. Going and, at the River Roding Trust, so on this river I'm in East London, we're doing a number of practical clear-up days.
Okay.
And that, it's like a nice cycle because it is actually helping nature, but also it allows you to speak for nature because you've demonstrated your love in a practical sense. You're not just saying, I want you to do this. It's like, I've gone and done this, so you should do this. You know, when I protest against water companies putting sewage into the river, it's more convincing because I can say, well, actually, I spent loads of my free time clearing up this river and you're destroying it. So I think practically going and doing things is definitely it.
There's a lot there which I kind of want to develop a bit further. You know, this bit about living by your principles clearly is something which you take very seriously, and also from what I understand, it is your life. You know, you're living by example, the kind of world you want to see. What I am curious about is the speaking bit.
Sort of.
Go on, what do you mean?
I'm also a hypocrite, you know, like we all are.
Okay,
like,
yeah.
I eat meat when I shouldn't because I'm kind of addicted to it and I don't have to cook without it. And yeah, I just want to correct that I'm definitely also a hypocrite. And I think most people who, unless you're quite sainted, if you believe in a better world, you probably are a bit of a hypocrite because it's really hard to live fully in alignment with the world you want in the system that we already inhabit.
I really appreciate your challenge there because actually that's the thing. This has come up where, you know, because we're looking to historic examples of people who made a difference, that distance from them as an individual human being means that sometimes we portray them in a saintly way, forgetting the fact that they were human and had flaws like each and every one of us, you know, in this conversation and watching, and it's just very human, as you say, to not. And I think sometimes social activists and campaigners might put themselves under unnecessary pressure to kind of do every single thing right when accepting actually we are flawed as individuals. So I really appreciate you challenging that.
And it is obviously good to align your behaviour as much as possible because it gives you the most that you can minimise your hypocrisy, gives you a kind of more a basis to speak on. But I think also if you demand complete purity before speaking out on issues, I think that tactic is designed that people don't speak out because it's very difficult to get purity. So by demanding purity, we're basically I think certain powers that be, particularly at the media, are trying to stop people speaking out. For instance, any climate activist, whether in XR, Insulate Britain, Just Stop Oil, you get these exposés in the Mail or the Sun going, this person went on holiday 5 years ago and they're a appalling hypocrite and they drive a car, you know? And like that is entirely designed to shut down those people talking. So I think it's important to recognise that we do need to align our behaviour as much as possible, but that we are all flawed. It's almost impossible to live within the current system and not be a hypocrite if you believe in a better world because of the way the whole system's set up. Recognise the hypocrisy, try and minimise it, but still speak out about something you want. Yeah.
No, I love that because it's very real, and the kind of people you refer to who are being supposedly exposed on newspapers, I mean, we're talking about people who've just tried to make a difference, but of course have lived lives, and in our lives there's many things that happen, some things which we regret and some things which we want to move on from, but it doesn't define a person's character, and actually it shouldn't, as you say, stop people from wanting to make a difference. I think that's a point which actually hasn't been shared here, so really? Yeah, it's very interesting, because, you know, we do know of particularly XR folk, people at Extinction Rebellion, people have been arrested who are still in prison, who are kind of, you know, their reputation has been tarnished according to some people, but at the same time, for other people, this is what's necessary in order for change to happen. And many folk have been imprisoned for fighting for what they believe is true, the anti-slavery movement, civil rights movement. I'm curious to know about how you do that, because the very specific example which we talked about recently was when the now King Charles was becoming king, and there were protests, and you can explain this better than me, but there was a point when you had gone up to an officer and held a plain piece of paper and asked what would happen if I wrote "Not My King." Is that correct? Yeah. And the reason why I asked that is in the specific context of being able to protest, and also the legal side of things, and also just the question of speaking up for what you believe in. There's a lot in there, but I think it's a very specific example of how, you know, people can challenge the powers that be. Tell us a bit about what happened there.
So there were quite a lot of reports happening, which were actually correct, that people were being challenged or threatened with arrest or arrested or moved on for peacefully expressing valid opinions about the monarchy during the week when the Queen died and King Charles came to the throne. And I really found those quite concerning. And a lot of lawyers...
Why?
Well, because free speech is a valuable thing and takes constant work to keep it that way. It's not something that just magically exists. It exists because people have fought for it, and it needs to be constantly. The state and certain actors will always try and restrict that right back down. So it always needs to be pushed back out again.
Yeah,
you need to push back on it. And a lot of lawyers do that. A lot of people in my chambers do it really, really well by, for instance, representing people in court who've been charged with things, which is really good. It's a really valid way of doing it. But the disadvantage of doing it that way is that by the time it comes to court, the whole news cycle has moved on and people have been prevented from protesting. So the police have had their effect in a way. You know, we see this all the time. The police will arrest people to get rid of a protest. And then 6 months, 12 months down the line, they'll either drop the charges or get found not guilty. And then they'll go, oh, sorry. Or no, actually not sorry. They won't apologise. They'll just go, oh, and then walk away. And the effect has still been the same, which is that free speech and the right to protest has been infringed. And even the paying of compensation doesn't give you back that right to speak about an important issue whilst it's happening. And so I thought it was good to push back in the moment. So I saw this stuff happening on Twitter, people being arrested. So I was like, I'll go down and challenge it, see what happens. Okay. So I literally left my chambers, and basically I was due to be in court the next day representing a client, and so I couldn't risk being arrested because what happens is, you know, they'll even if they just arrest you and let you go, you have to spend 15, 20 hours in a cell, and then you can't, you know, I can't afford to miss representing my client. So I was like, well, I won't even write "Not My King" on it. I'll just write nothing and see what happens.
Blank piece of paper.
Just a blank piece of paper and see what they. I mean, I thought they probably won't arrest me for that because that would be ridiculous, and they know it would be. So that's when I went with a blank piece of paper, and that's when the officer came up to me, and we started speaking. And I said, you know, what if I did write that on there to challenge him? Because again, if he said, well, I wouldn't arrest you, I probably would have written it on there because then I know I'm not going to get arrested. But he stupidly and wrongly said that he would arrest me because it's a criminal offence when it's clearly not. And then I'd literally put it on Twitter, and within a couple of minutes I realised that it was taking off. Like Twitter basically broke. I couldn't operate it anymore because I was getting so many notifications. And it seemed to really catch people's imagination as showing why what was happening and what the police were doing was wrong. And it had a really good effect in a sense. Like it created a backlash all around the world. The police kind of went, whoa, and then they issued a statement saying, we're not going to arrest people for peacefully protesting at this time. And then the next day, a group of us went down to the Houses of Parliament with signs saying "Not My King" or whatever we wanted, and held them up. And the police were walking past, and they were looking at us, and you could tell they really wanted to arrest us. They were like, "Oh, we don't like this, but we've just put out a statement." And there were all the media there, and they were like, "Oh, damn you, damn you!" And it worked, right? So it's like, you know, before they were like, you know, arresting people, and then they didn't. And then and it didn't happen 12 months down the line. It happened right there and then, and people actually messaged saying, I wasn't going to go and protest because I was worried, and now I know I can. Thank you. Great.
It is a wonderful example of ingenuity, creativity, courage, but also I think sticking to your principles, and in the moment realising this is the time to do it, and just standing up, getting up and going to where it's happening. And for many folk who, you know, want to figure out, like, how does one achieve social justice, oftentimes it comes with a very short space of time, of very small window of opportunity, that simply by being in a place at the right time or going to that place can make a huge difference. And had you gone a week later, nothing would have happened. Had you not been by the police officer and had that conversation, nothing would have happened. If you hadn't thought, let me bring a piece of paper, but you wouldn't, risk not being able to represent your client. So I think it's a great example where it doesn't necessarily need to be done in that way every single time, but that thought process of what can I do, and not knowing the full answer and just going out and making it happen and being out in the real world, like it's a wonderful example.
Yeah, I think just being a bit
cheeky.
I was literally saying the word cheeky. Yeah, exactly that. And it like peaceful. So it's not, and you're not going to get arrested because it's not a criminal offence, but kind of cheeky and slightly, troublemakery. But like in a kind of in a positive way of trying to say, actually, this is the right that I believe should exist, and maybe actually the word is playful.
Yeah, that's.
I like playfulness.
Yeah,
and kind of, that's how I think activism should be. Is kind of playful.
Go on. Can you talk a bit more about that? Because the playfulness part, hasn't necessarily been talked about much. There is a book which I forget the name of the book, but it basically talks about an activist's role during a dictatorship and using humorous tactics and playful means. I mean, why should people who want to make a difference think about the playful side of it?
I think it can have a big impact, but also it's more fun to do.
Yeah. That's the thing, isn't it?
And it's kind of it makes being an activist more fun because you're just kind of playing with it and having a good time. Yeah. Regardless of the outcome that you're doing. Actually, I quite enjoyed going down there and having a little cheeky thing with the police. It wasn't a bad way to spend my afternoon, Whereas like if I'd gone there and like tried to have a fight with the police and get arrested, the whole thing would have been stressful and awful and not that, and wouldn't have achieved the result. Yeah. I think there's a really great quote from David Graeber, which I think is also goes towards
David
Graeber,
okay.
Who he died a couple of years ago, but was an amazing anarchist, anthropologist, philosopher, and he was a key factor behind, person behind the 99%. We are the 99%.
Okay.
Slogan.
So international folk. What was that?
That was the Occupy movement. So he was, I think, a key person in that movement in New York, and then obviously spread that slogan, "We are the 99% around the world." So he's written very good books about anarchism, anthropology, protest, all these different things. And he described activism or direct action as living like you're already free. So you're not going to you're not going to protest the thing. You're just living as if you're already free, and then daring them to stop you. And I really like, and that goes into a lot of the stuff that I do. Like nature restoration is like, for me, it's like living like nature's already free. So like, I don't ask permission to plant a tree. I'm just going to plant the tree. And what they're going to do, what they're going to do. And so
it's like living the vision which you propose in the future, but actually living it now.
Yeah, and that is your protest. Another example, I'm involved in the Right to Roam movement.
What's that?
So that's basically a movement that says that for land justice and that we should have more access, goes back to the nature connection point, we should have more access to the countryside. Currently, only 8% of the English countryside is accessible to ordinary people, and most of it, or a lot of it, is still owned by massive landed estates that basically got it for free in feudal times. Yeah, not great. And so there's been various campaigns by like the Ramblers and people like that over decades to try and get increased access, but not really going anywhere. And then the Right to Roam movement has basically come in the last couple of years and started organising trespasses, which are both protests but also really fun in themselves. So like as an example, last summer we went and did a trespass on the estate of Richard Benyon, who's the government minister for access to nature. And he also owns a 12,000 acre estate that he keeps people out of mostly. See the contradiction there?
Yeah.
And we just went to his estate and we held like a beautiful day of like dancing and poetry under a beautiful oak tree on his land. And it was both a protest that really showed quite strongly why the current law is wrong. But I also had a great day, you know, as did everyone else. It was really nice and enjoyable.
Yeah, you're making me think about all the times when, you know, I've really enjoyed being a part of something, and it's when people are just kind of like taking ourselves less seriously and also just enjoying it with other folk and it being like a community thing. We did speak to a trade unionist who, you know, always would talk about how they'd use music and dance as a big part of their protest, and I think that's one huge consideration to have. I mean, for you, I'm just bearing in mind. Sorry, yeah, go on.
It's maybe another dimension, but it's another thing I would like to say is that one of the things that I identified, I think, is a key issue in our society is we genuinely take things far too seriously and not nearly seriously enough.
Go on.
So like, we're heading into probably the greatest crisis in human history and we're not addressing it at all. Like, these people in charge are not addressing the climate and ecological crisis or any of the social justice crises at all. We're not taking it seriously, but actually taking ourselves far too seriously. Like, very few people here are having a good time, even whilst destroying the earth.
So what's the point?
Actually, I really believe it's important to, yes, we need to all take up activism, but we also need to make sure we're enjoying ourselves while doing it. And actually, I genuinely believe that those two things aren't unconnected. I think actually, in some ways, the more we're enjoying it, the more effective that activism might be.
There's some really important words there. You start off with love, joy, hypocrisy, you know, living out the freedom of which you seek, challenge, protest, and almost this really important part about joy. For people who kind of are thinking about what principles to then do the activism about, you kind of allude to some of those, but I'm curious to see what your principles are in the work you do, which guide, you know, what are the things that guide you? You kind of mentioned, but I'm curious to just hear about them, you know, in a way, in a list, or, you know, are there key principles which drive your decision making?
Yeah. I guess, again, if you dig down enough beneath most forms of activism, you eventually get to what I think is what I would say is a spiritual belief. Even the people that think themselves as atheists, actually at the bottom of all these principles, when you delve down to the bottom of it, is actually basically a spiritual, philosophical belief in how you believe the world should be and what existence is for. And then we overlayer that with the arguments and justification. But actually, if you unpick it, generally at the bottom, there's always that. Like, why should we have equality between men and women? Why? And if you go down deeply enough, you generally find less philosophical, spiritual belief. And the same thing with ending of slavery. Why end slavery? Well, actually, a lot of it was because they had a religious belief that all human beings were equal. And that's, I guess, at the bottom of my set of beliefs is probably a belief that the divine is in all things and all people. I use the divine rather than God, 'cause God can seem like this kind of guy sitting on a cloud, so I don't want to use the capital G God, but like the divine is in all things.
And how do you define spiritual and divine?
That's a good question.
Or can you even define it?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Maybe it's the thing that's indefinable.
Like on the river I live in East London, I say that the river is sacred. That encapsulates it to me. This is why I don't really believe in environmental law or even environmental activism. Okay. Like, in a sense, because that's like saying, this resource, this river is a resource, and we need to steward this resource better so we humans can have it better. No. This river is sacred. And I believe this river has a spiritual importance to it. And that is also actually generally at the root of a lot of indigenous cultures. Yeah. Is ultimately, when you actually look into it, like the reason they treat the earth better is because they believe it's sacred. And we should probably look to those societies because they were successful. You know, the indigenous societies have stewarded their piece of the earth for thousands of years completely sustainably, because they believed that the earth and nature were sacred, arguably, and then that reflected in their decisions. Whereas we came along believing the earth wasn't sacred, that it's a resource to be extracted as quickly as possible, just for humans to use however they want. And we've absolutely, can I swear?
Yeah, of course.
We've absolutely fucked it up in 300 years, completely. Whereas these indigenous societies that had that belief have lasted sustainably for thousands of years. And that to me is the key difference between our society and theirs. They believe in the sacredness of the earth, nature, and all things.
It's something which isn't necessarily considered in countries where faith and religion are losing significance. And you pointed out, whether or not you're an atheist or not, like also there still is a spiritual dimension to life. And I think particularly for people of faith who are watching this as well, and as you say, those indigenous groups who have that connection with nature in ways where if you're in a city like this, it's quite difficult to have. Social justice can sometimes have a very urban sense to it, but actually I think what I've really appreciated now is the need to just go out to nature, reconnect, and also seeing that is part of our society, even though we might not consider it being in a metropolitan city like London. I'm just aware of time.
Yeah, sorry,
waffling
on at points.
There's so much, because what I am curious about is that, we talked about the need to speak out, but also part of your job is to think on behalf of those who might not have the knowledge you have of the legal system or have had the education you have. I'm curious to know about your process of thinking and learning. Have you gone out, or how have you basically taught yourself to be able to do what you do? Is it reading? Is it conversation? Is it formal education? I'm just very curious to know about...
It's a very broad question, yeah.
It is very broad, but like, for people who are like, okay, cool, here are some examples, but actually it'll be good to have a guiding means through which I can learn. And it doesn't necessarily need to be too broad. It could be like, well, if I want to find out about, the monarchy, and I want to figure out my opinion on whether or not I'm a Republican or support the monarchy, how do you go about that? Or when you're about to make a case and you're reading the notes and the facts of the matter, like, how do you learn about being able to make that case? To ask it in a more, I guess, direct way, what is your process of learning?
Mine is, and I think different people have different styles of learning. Yeah. Mine is largely through doing and experiencing.
Okay.
So I've actually found, for various reasons, being a barrister actually quite hard.
Okay.
There's parts of it definitely
seems like a hard job.
Yeah, and there's parts that don't come naturally to me. But basically, I'm originally from a working class background, and I needed to do this job in order to earn money. So I actually had to force myself into situations over numerous years that were incredibly difficult and stressful. Like going to court is actually really hard. Like you've got an angry judge shouting at you, and your papers aren't helpful, and your client's not helpful, and it's just so stressful. But by doing that year after year after year for over a decade now, I've become immune, I think, a little bit to stress over speaking in public, and have learned how to construct an argument on my feet, I guess.
So if you want to get good at something, you just got to really appreciate the fact that it's going to be very hard and you're not going to be very good at it in the beginning, but you've got to keep on going. And same way, like if you're a boxer, you're not going to become like Muhammad Ali or Floyd Mayweather if you quit on your first round of boxing. You've got to...
Although for me, to be honest, I find it very difficult to practice something where I'm not forced to. Like I've never learned to play an instrument. I don't know how to play chess. Anything that takes an upfront level of practicing that you have to just make yourself do, I'm rubbish at it. The reason the bar worked for me is because I had to go there every day, no matter what the situation was, because I needed to earn money. Yeah. And basically in doing that, I gave myself a 10-year lesson in public speaking in all circumstances. So that was useful. And also I really with regards to nature, I'm really into the process of doing. So I started out trying to plant trees, but then quite a lot of them died. So I learned that actually it's really important to protect existing trees. And that's how I got into trying to protect existing trees, and also then learning how to plant trees differently and plant different trees in different places. And those ones survived. And I was like, okay, well that's...
So experimentation and learning, constant feedback loop.
I really often believe that for me, and I think for quite a lot of people, the path that you want to take is rarely obvious from the start of it. It's a bit like, in Indiana Jones, when he has to walk across that gap and then the path, the stones appear as he walks on them, but he has to trust that it does. It's a bit like that, like the path appears to you as you walk it.
Yeah.
And like I couldn't have predicted 10 years ago that I would be doing the activism work that I'm currently doing.
Yeah.
But equally, if I hadn't started on the journey of doing those things, I would never have got to where I am.
Yes, and as someone who has worked with a small team to create the School of Social Justice, where we're sat here in a room with 3 cameras, and we just had the idea of, well, if we could go back in time and speak to the heroes of the past, like that would be amazing to capture wisdom. But why not do that with people we know now, so that future generations can learn? Because I'm so excited to hear the news maybe in 10 years or 2 years time when someone's watched this video, is like, I want to be like Paul. Or I've just planted 20 plants, I've protected this river. That's the dream, but we don't know, and we don't know where it's going to go, but you've got to take that leap of faith.
And the key thing I'd say to people, actually, the key lesson I would say from my experience is start doing something. Don't wait for the perfect idea, don't wait to conceptualize the exact thing you want to do. Start doing something, and even if that doesn't work, it will probably lead you to the thing that you will end up doing. Because rarely do we just the first thing we do is the magic thing that is going to be our life.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, and looking back, I wouldn't have even guessed that the things that I did were going to influence me in the way they did. For instance, I told you I got a boat, not because I desperately wanted to fall in love with nature and then become a lawyer to protect it and then advocate for the rights of nature. I got a boat because I didn't want to pay rent. I needed somewhere to live, and that led me down this path, right? And I got the barrister job because I did law and I was good at speaking and needed to earn money, so I went and did that, and then these things have converged. So I'd really recommend to people to start, and you will iterate it as you go. And the thing you end up doing, like you actually, and I do also believe that everybody has a unique thing to give. That has a calling that is needed in this time. We are, I think, in the most crucial, important juncture in human existence, where things are either going to go into much better or really, really bad. And each of us, every single one of us, has something to give in this time. All of us do. And finding out what your gift is and how you're going to give it is that crucial work. And generally, I found that I do that best by just doing and letting that path open itself to me as I walk it. And I'd really recommend that as a way to start out for people.
That's it. Follow Indiana Jones and
believe that the path will open out to you as you walk it. But start walking, because as I say, I don't repeat myself, but every single person watching this has a gift to give in this time, and your gift is much needed and maybe vital.
Yeah. One final question, because I'm very okay. Yeah, I'll ask.
Can I say one more thing from that as well?
Of course.
I think in this time, given the complexity of the issues that we face and how they interrelate, we need to give up the idea of cause and effect activism.
Go on, what's that?
So the idea that I did this protest and it achieved this end goal. Because the issues are so complex and so scary that you're rarely going to do that. You're rarely going to say, oh, I did this one protest and it solved climate change. Not going to happen. And I really believe that for most of us, the biggest impact we have as humans and as activists is probably one we may never know. Like, you may just do a protest that inspires one person to do something, and they become the next Greta Thunberg or the next Gandhi, and that changes something. Or, who knows? And it may well be that by speaking here today, one person watches this and does one thing, and that's my biggest impact on Earth. Who knows? The point is, I will not probably find out what my biggest impact is, and neither will you or anyone else, because the issues are so complex. so interrelated. But just keep pushing towards your goal and trust that you will have the impact that is needed.
Such an important point, because oftentimes we don't know the impact we're having on other people. We often don't know that we're being watched or seen by other people. And sometimes you put so much hard work into something and think nothing's come of it. But actually, sometimes you just never know. And it's, again, another principle and way of looking at activism, which I think will help and guide so many folk. One final question, particularly because of the recent media attention on the issues that you've kind of raised. Media work is very important. Arguably, this is media work, right? We're creating content, and videos and educational videos in order to share with people. Why should activists care about the media? I have my own answer, but I'm just curious, why is that media work important? Particularly when lots of people say, well, you're just in it to be featured on this, or, you know, why speak to media? There's other more important work to do. I mean, for me, it's one part of the job, which is to reach many people, and the media is something that many people consume. I mean, what's your thoughts on that, just in terms of the importance of media in pushing change? And you talked about some of the negative impact.
It's a difficult balance, because I think some people, and indeed some activists, get so caught up in chasing, in a sort of narcissistic chasing of media and the spotlight, that becomes the end goal in itself. Bad. However, if you don't do any of that work or don't think about it at all, you could end up doing loads of work and just shouting into the void. So it's good to have a balance of the two. And like, for instance, with the Not My King stuff, the protest around the monarchy, that like doubled my Twitter followers, right? And so I then haven't used that to like send loads of selfies of myself and pictures of my breakfast. I've then used those followers to like campaign for rights of nature and to like bring the audience over to that side. And now it has been amazing. Like, when I post stuff now about my river, like I can give you a perfect example. So basically, I was walking along the river, and there was loads of sewage being thrown into the river, like huge waterfall of sewage going into the river. Like a couple of years ago, if I tweeted about that, I would have been largely ignored because I didn't have that many followers. After the Not My King stuff, there were enough people following that basically it got hundreds of thousands of shares around the world. Next day, I walked down the same place of the river, and Thames Water had shut off the street and brought in tankers to take that sewage out before it went in the river, right? So those followers meant the difference between tons of sewage being thrown into my river and not. So you have to walk that line between having enough following and influence that what you say is picked up and can lead to change, without letting the pursuit of influence and followers to become an end in itself. Always think, what am I using this influence for? To always bring yourself back to that.
This is a topic which I feel deserves its own
it's a whole thing, And I'd love some more, because those are just examples that I've found from it, and it's a delicate balance.
It's a delicate balance. I think the point to the narcissistic part and the psychology of activism, for me, is a topic which, having spoken to so many folk on these chairs, and the reasons why people do what they do, we are complex creatures, and the psychological aspect of activism is something which, you know, we could do a whole series on, because it's very fascinating as to why activists become activists and want to achieve social justice. As said, there's not enough time to talk about today, but maybe in a future series where we have you again on as a guest. Any final words before we close to our students that you want to share? There's so much already in what you've shared, but just wanted to give you one last opportunity if you would like to share something with people.
I mean, just to reiterate what I said earlier, you know, we are, I believe, at the most crucial juncture in human existence. We have multiple overlapping and interconnected crises that are coming together. And in our lifetimes, over the next few decades, and definitely by the end of this century, humanity is going to, I believe, go one way or another. So don't sit this one out. Find something that speaks to you, something that you can have an influence on, and go out there and start trying to make a difference in being an activist. It's so important. So I think one thing that for me helps to make my activism sustainable is cycling between what I call the micro and the macro. So big things and small things. Like for changing the laws to get rights of nature into our law in the UK is going to be the work of many decades and may never happen. And so for me, if I was just doing that, I might feel like I wasn't getting anywhere, and I need to feel that sense of achievement of having done something.
Yeah.
So at the same time, I also go and plant trees so that I have had that impact. But equally, if I just planted trees, it's not going to solve the overall crisis because they're just a couple of trees, right?
Yeah.
So I constantly move between one and the other. I plant some trees and know that I've made a difference on a small scale, and then go and do the big picture stuff as well. And I find that having, if we can term it, a balanced activist diet of big and small, micro and macro, really helps to cover all those different needs.
There's so many analogies you can use there, from football, where you can't always try and hit a 40-yard screamer like Steven Gerrard. Sometimes you've got to have a tap in or a simple pass. Baseball, you can't always swing for a home run. You've got to sometimes just tap the ball and help the other team get to the other base. But without wanting to use too many sport analogies, like, you need that in order to kind of, in a way, you're taking care of yourself, because it's such a huge issue that sometimes you might be dealing with, and you might just become disheartened when you're like, nothing's moving.
Right. Or even worse, I've done cases where I've lost, and the tree that I've been trying to protect has been killed, and it's devastating. It's absolutely devastating. Yeah. Like, I can feel myself getting emotional just thinking about it, like some of the losses of the trees that have been suffered. And no matter what, despite my best efforts and despite the efforts of so many campaigners, we've lost trees and nature has been destroyed. And that can really get you down and burn you out. But then I come home and I see the trees that I've planted and see that they're healthy and doing well and growing, and it kind of gives me that inner strength to keep going. So I really fundamentally believe that you need a bit of both, big and small. Yeah. Big picture and details.
And I think just on the end point, really taking care of yourself as well. Yeah. Because it's a hard job trying to take care of all of these things that you've mentioned.
And spend time in the nature that you're trying to love and protect, and that for me, spending time in nature gives me that strength and that courage to keep going on the wider battles. So also enjoy the natural world that you're trying to defend.
That's it. Well, that's what I'm going to do. 2 weeks, flies Philippines.
Yeah, exactly. Go and put your feet on the sandy beach.
Paul, I just want to say a big thank you for your time coming in today, but also just of me being an observer of your work. As you pointed out, activism and this work can be very hard, whether you be in the courts, helping your clients, or challenging what we believe to be right and wrong when it comes to big issues around the monarchy and our nation's future and our society's relationship with nature. I just want to really thank you for your hard work, because people like you really do make a difference. And I'm sure people who are watching this have been inspired to follow in your footsteps. So thank you so much. We're really glad to have you at the School of Social Justice, and thanks for your teachings.
Thank you.
This educational content is absolutely free. Why? Because our vision is a world where anybody, no matter their background, can learn how to make a difference. To keep going, we need your help. Can you become our next patron? Can you help us reach 2,500 patrons? I really hope so. Whatever the case, hope you learned something today, and sending you peace and love. Let's keep learning.